just on paper, doesn't exist, how I almost lost my home to my sister's entitlement, and why I have zero regrets. Posted to r/justnofamily. I've been lurking on this subreddit for years, occasionally commenting, occasionally shaking my head at stories that sounded too wild to be real. And now here I am, writing one of those stories myself. I'm going to try to keep this organized because it's a long one, and because honestly, telling it in order is the only way I can make sense of what happened to my family over the past 14 months. Some background before I get into it. My name is Claire. I'm 33 years old. I'm a real estate attorney in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have been practicing law for 8 years, first at a mid-size firm and now as a senior associate at a firm that handles primarily residential and commercial real estate transactions, title disputes, and mortgage litigation. I say this not to brag. I say this because it is the single most relevant fact in this entire story, and yet it was the fact that my family chose to ignore most aggressively. I own a 2-bedroom condominium in the South End neighborhood of Charlotte. I bought it 4 years ago for $387,000. I put down 20%, negotiated my own mortgage, reviewed my own title work, and I have paid every single mortgage payment on time, every month, without assistance from anyone. The condo is currently worth somewhere between $490,000 and $510,000, depending on comparable sales in the quarter. It is the largest financial asset I own. It is also my home. I have a rescue cat named Statute and a balcony where I drink my coffee every morning, and I love it unreasonably. My sister's name is Danielle. She is 31. She has never held a job for more than 2 years. She has been engaged twice, once to a man named Travis, who she described as her soulmate until he wasn't, and currently to a man named Greg, who I will come back to at length. Danielle is not a bad person in the way that villains in movies are bad. She is bad in the way that people are bad when they have been overloved and underchallenged their entire lives. Everything has always been smoothed in front of her. Every consequence has been absorbed by someone else. She is 31 years old and she has never had to reckon with the full weight of a decision she made. My parents are Robert and Linda. They live in Gastonia, about 40 minutes from Charlotte. My father is a retired electrician. My mother worked in school administration. They are good people who made one catastrophic parenting mistake, which was deciding sometime around Danielle's 6th birthday that she was too sensitive for consequences, and they have been paying for that decision ever since. We all have. The setup. It started on a Sunday in January, 14 months ago, with a family dinner at my parents' house. I want to describe this dinner because the details matter. My mother had made pot roast, which she only makes for occasions she considers significant. There was a tablecloth. There were candles. My father poured wine before we sat down, which he also doesn't usually do. I notice these things the way I notice things. I'm a lawyer, I read rooms, I read people, and I remember thinking, someone is about to ask me for something. Greg was there. Greg is 38, and he sells insurance or manages insurance accounts or something insurance adjacent. I've never been entirely clear on the specifics because every time it comes up he pivots to talking about his investment portfolio, which I have since learned consists of a Robinhood account and a timeshare in Myrtle Beach. He has the energy of a man who has watched a lot of YouTube videos about real estate investing and now considers himself an expert. He refers to properties as assets, and to money as capital, and to debt as leverage. And every time he does this in my presence, I feel a small blood vessel somewhere behind my left eye begin to throb. We got through the pot roast. We got through the small talk. My mother brought out apple pie, and then my father cleared his throat, and Greg leaned forward with the energy of a man who had rehearsed this moment, and my father said, "Claire, we wanted to talk to you about something. About helping Danielle and Greg." I put down my fork. "They want to buy a house," my father continued. "They found a place, a really nice place over in Concord, 3 bedrooms, good school district, good neighborhood. The issue is the financing. Greg has some things on his credit," my mother added, in the soft voice she uses when she's explaining away Danielle's problems. "It's not his fault, really. He had a business venture a few years back that didn't work out, and there were some accounts that went to collections." I looked at Greg. Greg was looking at the table with the practiced expression of a man performing humility. "And Danielle's income is inconsistent," my father said, which was a generous way of describing the fact that Danielle had been working part-time at a wellness boutique for 8 months. "So they can't qualify for a mortgage on their own right now." "Okay," I said. "I'm sorry to hear that. What are you asking?" My father and mother exchanged a glance. Greg looked up from the table. Danielle reached over and put her hand over mine. "We just need you to put the condo in both your names," Danielle said. "Just on paper. So it shows as an asset when Greg applies. The bank just needs to see collateral. It's just a formality." There was a silence. Just on paper, I repeated. Just on paper, my mother confirmed, nodding, as if repetition made it true. I took a breath. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. And then I set the glass down very carefully and I said, "That's not a thing that exists." Update 1. The explanation nobody wanted. I want to be clear about what happened over the next 45 minutes, because I've replayed it in my head many times since then and I want to be accurate. I did not raise my voice. I did not call anyone stupid. I did not lecture or condescend. I explained, as clearly and as simply as I could, what putting the condo in both names would actually mean and what it would actually do. I told them that adding Danielle to the title of my condo was not a paperwork formality. It was a legal transfer of ownership interest. If I added Danielle to the deed as a co-owner, she would legally own a portion of my home. She would have the right to occupy it. She would have the right to force a partition sale if we ever disagreed about what to do with it. She would have the right to encumber it with debt. If she and Greg later married and then divorced, it could become a marital asset in North Carolina and be subject to equitable distribution. If she died, her interest would pass through her estate. If I tried to sell my own home, I would need her signature. I told them that if Greg was using my condo as collateral to secure a mortgage, and if Greg later defaulted on that mortgage, which, given what I just learned about his financial history, was not a hypothetical to take lightly, the lender could potentially come after my property. I told them that the bank was not asking for a paper asset. The bank was asking for a real asset with real legal weight and real legal consequences. I told them that I was a real estate attorney. That this was literally my area of practice. That I was not being difficult or selfish or paranoid. I was telling them the factual, legal reality of what they were asking. My father nodded slowly throughout this. I could see him processing it, really trying to absorb it. I thought for a moment that he understood. Then Greg said, "I don't think it's actually that complicated. My buddy did something similar when he bought his boat. It's just how banks work sometimes." And something inside me went very still. "Greg," I said, with a patience I was consciously manufacturing, "your buddy's boat situation is not relevant to real property law. I am describing to you the legal framework under which real estate ownership, title, and secured lending operate in the state of North Carolina. I am not guessing. This is my profession." I know, he said, in a tone that meant he didn't know and didn't intend to accept it. "But the mortgage broker we talked to said it could work." "What exactly did the mortgage broker say?" A pause. Greg looked at Danielle. Danielle looked at my mother. "He said that having a co-signer or co-owner with an existing asset could help with the application," my mother said. "Right," I said. "A co-signer. That's different from what you're describing. A co-signer on Greg's mortgage would mean I'm guaranteeing Greg's loan with my creditworthiness. I'm still not going to do that. But what you described originally, adding Danielle to the title of my condo, that is a transfer of ownership. Those are two different things, and neither of them is something I'm willing to do." Danielle started to cry. Not the angry kind of crying, the soft, delicate kind that she had perfected by approximately age 9, the kind that made my parents' spines dissolve. "I just don't understand why you're making this so hard," she said. "We're family. I would do this for you." "Danielle," I said gently, "you don't own any property. You couldn't do this for me. And I'm not making it hard. I'm explaining why I can't do it." My mother said, "Claire, you have so much. You have your career, you have your place. Danielle is just trying to start her life." I drove home that night with my hands very steady on the wheel and a feeling in my chest like something fundamental had shifted. Update 2. The campaign. Over the next 6 weeks, my family ran what I can only describe as a coordinated pressure campaign. It began with phone calls. My mother called every 3 or 4 days, never directly asking again, just mentioning how stressed Danielle was, how the house in Concord was so perfect, how the seller had already had one offer fall through and might not wait. My father called once and said, awkwardly, that he hoped I would reconsider, that family was family. Danielle sent me long text messages that began with, "I know you think I'm asking too much," and ended with variations on, "I just feel like you don't care about me." Then came the extended family. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was between meetings. She opened with, "Honey, I've been hearing about this situation with Danielle, and I knew immediately what was happening." My mother had been making calls. I was cordial with Patricia. I explained, again, as clearly as I could, what the legal situation was. Patricia said, "But isn't there a way to protect yourself? Like a contract between you two?" I explained that a side agreement between family members does not override property law and would be extremely difficult to enforce, particularly in a scenario where Danielle had been granted a legal ownership interest and then disputed the terms of any informal arrangement. Patricia said, "I'm sure Danielle wouldn't do that." I said, with tremendous restraint, "I'm sure you're right, Patricia, but I'm not willing to stake my home on it." My cousin Marcus sent me a Facebook message. My parents' neighbor, a woman named Dolores who has known me since I was 8 years old, called my mother to say she was sure I'd come around. The most sophisticated attempt came from Greg directly. He sent me an email, an actual formatted email with a subject line that read, "Proposal Re, Asset Support Structure," in which he outlined what he described as a legally protected arrangement that he had researched extensively. The arrangement involved me transferring title to a family LLC that would then be used as the collateral vehicle. He cited 2 YouTube videos and a Reddit thread from a real estate investing forum. I forwarded the email to a colleague of mine, Sarah, who handles business entity formation. She called me laughing so hard she could barely speak. I drafted a response to Greg's email that was 3 paragraphs long, calm in tone, and systematically dismantled every element of his proposal using actual citations to North Carolina general statutes and case law. I explained why the LLC structure he proposed would not solve the lender's concerns, would expose me to additional liability, and was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how secured real estate transactions work. Greg did not respond to my email. But Danielle called me that night and told me I had humiliated him. I sent him a legal explanation of why his proposal wouldn't work, I said. "You made him feel stupid," she said. "I cited statutes," I said. "I didn't name-call. I didn't mock him. I explained the law." "You know what I mean," she said, and she hung up. That was in early March. I didn't hear from my immediate family for almost 2 weeks after that. I used the silence to document everything. I saved every text, every voicemail, every email. Not because I thought I would need it, but because I am a lawyer and documentation is a reflex. Update 3. The Accusation. The silence broke in mid-March when my mother called me on a Saturday morning and told me, in a voice tight with controlled emotion, that Danielle and Greg had lost the house in Concord. "The seller accepted another offer," my mother said. "They waited as long as they could, but without the financing." "I understand," I said. "I'm sorry they lost the house they wanted." "Are you?" my mother asked. And in her voice there was something I hadn't heard before. A hardness. A decision that had been made. "Mom, you could have helped. You chose not to. And now Danielle is devastated." "Mom," I explained. "I know what you explained, Claire. You explained it very thoroughly. You explained why you couldn't help, why it was too complicated, why it was too risky. You're very good at explaining. But sometimes family doesn't need explanations. Sometimes family just needs you to show up." I sat with that for a moment. "If showing up means signing over a portion of my home," I said carefully, "then I don't know how to show up in that way. What you're describing isn't love. It's an invitation for a legal and financial catastrophe that I would have no way to undo." My mother said, "I hope you're happy with your condo, Claire," and ended the call. That same afternoon, Danielle posted to her Facebook. She didn't name me directly, but the post read, "Funny how the people with the most always give the least. Some lessons hurt, but they're necessary." Broken heart, it had 47 likes within the hour, including from relatives who I now realized had been receiving a very specific version of events. My father called me that evening. This conversation was different. My father is not a dramatic man. He doesn't perform. He said, "I want you to know that your mother and I are both very disappointed. We raised you to put family first." "Dad," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to really hear it. If I had added Danielle to my deed, and then something had gone wrong, Greg defaulted, or they divorced, or there was a dispute, and I had lost my home, or been forced into a legal battle over my own property, would you have taken responsibility for that?" Silence. "Because you're asking me to take a risk I've told you is real and significant. And the people encouraging me to take that risk have no skin in the game." "I do. It's my home," my father said. "It would never have come to that." "You don't know that," I said. "And I'm not willing to bet my home on it." He said, "I think you should take some time to reflect on what kind of person you want to be." I said, "I reflect on that regularly." That's why I said no. We hung up. I sat on my couch for a long time. Statute climbed onto my lap, and I stared at the wall and thought about the specific texture of being told that protecting yourself is a moral failing. That was a hard few weeks. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Update 4. The Fallout and the Discovery. Here is where the story takes a turn. In late April, I got a call from my cousin Renee. Not the relatives who had been recruited into my mother's soft pressure campaign, but Renee, who is sensible and straight-talking and have been watching the family drama with the slightly exhausted expression of someone who has seen this movie before. I'm going to tell you something, Renee said, and I want you to just listen before you react. I said I was listening. Greg has done this before, Renee said. She had been talking to a friend of a friend who had known Greg before he moved to the Charlotte area. Apparently, Greg's previous financial difficulties, the ones described to me as an unfortunate business venture, involved a situation where his then-girlfriend had co-signed a business loan at his request, and when the business failed, she was left responsible for approximately $34,000 in debt. They had broken up shortly after. The girlfriend had spent 2 years dealing with the financial consequences. I'm going to be very measured in how I describe my reaction to this information, which is to say that I felt something cold and precise settle over my thinking, like a lens clicking into focus. I said, "How confident are you in this?" Renee said, "Confident enough to call you." I said, "Thank you," and I meant it at a cellular level. I didn't do anything dramatic with this information. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront Danielle. I thought about it for several days. I thought about what my responsibilities were and what they weren't. I thought about whether sharing this with my family would be received as the warning it was intended to be, or as further evidence that I was undermining Danielle's happiness. I decided to write a letter. A real letter, printed and mailed, addressed to both my parents. In the letter, I explained what I had learned about Greg's financial history. I explained it dispassionately, without editorializing, without accusation. I cited what I could verify. I am an attorney, I know how to run a basic background search, and some of what Renee had told me was corroborated by public records related to the civil case that had resulted from the business loan default. I told my parents that I was sharing this information not to reopen the fight about the condo, which was closed, but because I loved Danielle and I was worried about her. I asked them to consider that my concerns about the original request might have been less about selfishness and more about a pattern I was only now beginning to see clearly. I mailed the letter. I waited. My mother called me 8 days later. The call lasted 4 minutes. She told me that she had spoken to Greg, who had explained the situation with the loan, and that it was far more complicated than I was making it seem, and that it was very hurtful that I was trying to sabotage Danielle's relationship when Danielle was finally happy. She told me that Greg had said he expected this kind of behavior from me because I had made it clear from the beginning that I didn't support them. My father did not call. Danielle sent me a text that said, "I can't believe you would do this. I hope you're proud of yourself." I saved the text. I sat with it. I felt the specific grief of watching people you love make choices you cannot stop them from making. I did not respond. Update 5. The Reckoning. 9 months later. It is November. I am at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my cat, and I am thinking about how to describe what happened between April and now in a way that is fair and complete. Danielle and Greg did eventually find a different house. They bought a smaller place in a suburb farther from Charlotte, in Greg's name only, with a higher interest rate and a smaller down payment than they'd originally hoped for. My parents contributed $20,000 toward the down payment. I was not told about this until it had already happened. Renee mentioned it in passing. The money came out of an account my parents maintained as an informal emergency fund, money they had been saving for years. I don't know how to feel about that. I feel something, but it's layered and I haven't fully excavated it yet. What I know is this: 6 weeks after they moved in, Greg was laid off from his insurance position. I don't have all the details. What I know is that there were performance issues, and the separation was not entirely voluntary. They fell behind on the mortgage by the second month. My parents gave them another $8,000 to cover the gap. My mother told me this on the phone in October, in a voice that was tired in a way I hadn't heard before, and she didn't frame it as an accusation. She just told me. Like a report. I said, "Mom, I'm sorry. That's really stressful." She said, "Yes. It is." There was a long pause, and then she said, "You were right about the collateral thing. I understand that now. I looked it up. I watched a video about it. I didn't say I told you. I didn't say anything that resembled I told you. I said, I know it's a hard situation. I'm glad you understand it better now." She said, "I'm not sure I handled things well. With you. Earlier this year." I said, "It's okay, Mom." She said, "I don't know if it is." And I think that was the most honest thing my mother has said to me in years. Possibly ever. My father and I had a longer conversation in early November. He came to Charlotte for an errand and called to ask if we could have coffee. We sat in a place near my office, and he didn't make speeches. He just said, "I know I put you in a hard spot. I should have listened to you more carefully. You know things I don't know, and I let my feelings about Danielle override my judgment." I told him I understood. I told him it had hurt, and I wanted him to know that even though I forgave it, I needed him to understand that what had been asked of me wasn't a small thing. My home. My financial security. My professional credibility as someone who understands exactly what these transactions mean. He said he understood. I think he did. Danielle and I are not in a good place. I won't pretend otherwise. She is caught between a version of events in which I failed her and the slowly emerging reality that Greg's financial instability was not a one-time misfortune but a pattern. I don't know how long it will take her to reconcile those two things. I can't do that work for her. What I can tell you is that in late October, she sent me a text that said, "I'm not ready to talk yet, but I'm not as angry as I was." I texted back, "Whenever you're ready. No pressure." That's where we are. The reflection. I've been thinking about what this whole year has taught me, and I'll try to articulate it because I think it might be useful for other people in similar situations. The phrase, "just on paper," is almost always used to minimize a thing that cannot be minimized. In real estate law, on paper is reality. A deed is not a gesture. A title transfer is not a formality. When someone says, "just on paper," they are asking you to make a legal commitment while pretending that the legal commitment doesn't count. It's one of the most dangerous phrases in personal finance, and it is used almost exclusively on people who love the person asking. I was asked to risk my home for a reason that sounded like love. It was framed as family loyalty, as generosity, as the kind of showing up that real family does. But underneath the framing was a request to absorb risk on behalf of someone who was not fully reckoning with their own circumstances. And even further underneath that was a man with a documented history of asking women to absorb his financial risk for him. I did not lose my home. I did not lose my financial security. I strained my relationship with my family, and that was genuinely painful, more painful than I've probably communicated here, because I was raised to love my family, and I do love my family, imperfect and difficult as they have proven to be in this particular season. But here is what I have, sitting at my kitchen table in November. I have my condo. I have my cat on my lap. I have my mortgage, current as it has always been, in my name alone, on a property that belongs entirely to me. I have the knowledge that when I was asked to do something I knew was wrong, when the people I loved most looked at my expertise and decided it was an inconvenience to route around, I held the line. Not angrily. Not dramatically. With the quiet, methodical clarity of someone who understood exactly what was being asked and said, simply, no. No is a complete sentence. No, explained clearly and documented carefully, is an act of self-respect. No, maintained under sustained pressure from people you love, is one of the hardest things a person can do. And no, as it turned out, was also the thing that kept my family from suffering a far larger financial catastrophe than the one they eventually landed in anyway. I'm not glad about how things unfolded. I'm not celebrating. I'm sitting with the complexity of it, the grief of a year that changed something in how I understand my family, and the strange, quiet steadiness of having not given way. If you're in a situation where someone is asking you to do something, just on paper, I want you to hear this directly. There is no such thing as just on paper. There is only paper, and what's written on it is real. ETA, for everyone asking, yes, I did consult with a colleague before any of this to make sure my own understanding was correct and I wasn't missing something. I was not missing something. No, I will not be naming my city or the specific development. No, I don't think Danielle is a villain. I think she's a person who hasn't been taught to see clearly, which is different. Yes, I'm okay. Thanks for the kind messages. ETA 2, for the commenter who said, you could have just done it and filed a quitclaim deed after. I am a real estate attorney. I am aware of quitclaim deeds. I am also aware that a quitclaim deed transfers whatever interest you have, does not clear encumbrances created while the other person held title, and is not a magic undo button. Please do not give legal advice in the comments of a post written by a lawyer describing a legal situation.